Welcome to Becoming Spiritual, a podcast about the magic that surrounds us and has always been a part of us. I'm your host, Heather Dolan, a passionate seeker dedicated to bringing together beautiful humans who are doing amazing things in this world. Together, we will explore healing modalities and practical spiritual practices that can enrich your everyday life. We will also hear stories of awakenings, many from people in the corporate world who have broken out of the spiritual closet. Wherever you are in your journey, know you have found a community of open-hearted individuals committed to making themselves and our world a better place. Welcome home. In today's episode, I sit down with Dr. Rima Bonario. She's a writer and teacher focused on attentional sovereignty, graceful endings, and keeper work, the practice of staying human and coherent during times of profound change. With over 30 years in psychology, consciousness studies, and embodied spiritual practice, she helps people relocate authority from external systems back into the living intelligence of the heart. She is the author of the best-selling book, The Seven Queendoms, and her work has evolved from initiation and empowerment towards cultural and personal orientation, how to release identities, relationships, and structures with dignity rather than collapse. Holding a doctorate in transformational psychology and trained in trauma-informed and body-based practices, Rima weaves depth psychology, myth, and lived experience to explore how attention shapes ethics, relationship, and resilience. Her work offers clarity without urgency, spirituality without bypass, and guidance for those navigating endings with integrity. And that last sentence about endings with integrity is a big part of our conversation today. Rima and I are going to go deep into how, when we are in the messy middle of things, when things feel like either they've just ended or they're falling apart, or we just feel unaligned to things going on in our life, whether that's work or personal relationships, how when you're navigating it, you can make choices to move through these things and see them for the transformational gifts that they are. Or on the other side, sometimes we just have to give ourselves grace and let things fall apart. And without judgment, we need to just be there for the grief and for the love and care that we can give ourselves, knowing that things will always move back into an upward swing at some point. And so a lot of our conversation today is around where Rima is in her life, having built this very extensive community where she has shared different programs. She has her book. She has hosted events. She's gone on spiritual retreats, and she finds herself at the end of many chapters in her life, and she is in a bit of the void and a blank space, and she is trusting that the universe and the divine is going to show her a plan when the time is right. But right now, she's just really in that space and humbled by this experience. And so we thought it was really important to have this conversation today, and I'll share some more context in the episode about what it is like when you're actually in that space, because a lot of times we hear about those journeys when they're done and you're on the other side. So this is a really unique opportunity to get a perspective from someone who's navigating a lot of change and a lot of endings, and she's doing it so beautifully. So I hope you enjoy this conversation that we had today. It gives me a lot of hope. It really comes from the heart, and there's some really good practical wisdom that comes from the conversation as well. So thank you so much for listening. Before we get into today's episode, I am very excited to tell you about a retreat that I am co-hosting with Crystal Roberts of Watermelon Wellness. You might remember Crystal from our most recent episodes that we dropped at the beginning of 2026. Check those out if you haven't. But we are hosting a retreat on May 1st, which is Beltane and a full moon. So some really powerful energies coming in until May 3rd. And it's called Ley Lines of Your Spirit, using crystalline energy to awaken your soul. We are going to gather at the Cedar Lodge Retreat House in Bella Vista, Arkansas. You might be wondering why Arkansas, and you can find out why and all the information on the retreat at our website at becomingspiritual.me. You'll see there's a drop-down box for retreats, and you can read all about what we're going to be doing when we gather there, what the itinerary is, why you should think about attending, the setting, accommodations, all of the information's on our website. So if you feel called, if this resonates with you and you're interested in joining us, please fill out an information form and we can send you more details on all the things retreat. Please feel free to share with others. We are keeping it pretty small. We want it to be an intimate gathering. Spots are filling up already. We're more than half sold. So if this calls to you, please reach out. We would love to have you. Thanks so much for listening, and let's jump into our next episode. As I mentioned in the intro, I am very happy to be joined by Rima, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here with you, Heather. I just am touched at the invitation and really looking forward to the juicy conversation.
Me too. After sharing your bio, some people might wonder, what is this conversation going to be about? And it's a bit unique because I always like to give some context as to how the conversation came about. So we have a friend in common, a priestess that I know you do lots of work with, Connie Bigletti, and I had gotten her newsletter, and in it, she referenced some work that she's doing with you. And I just immediately felt called to reach out to you. And I went to your website first. And as soon as I started, I think I read for like 30 seconds and I'm like, yep, meant to reach out to her. And this is the universe putting the breadcrumbs and planting the seeds for us, which is going to be a big part of today's conversation. So I think it's important to share this context. And so I reached out to you with no agenda other than I'd like to connect. I have this podcast and had no idea what the conversation would be. So you're sharing a bit about you and all the work you've done with the sacred feminine and your book and your coursework that you've put together and the center that you've created. And we get on the call and you're like, and I think I'm letting it all go. And for me, that was like, what? Like you've built all these things and how? And so right away, that was the conversation. That was what we are meant to talk about today, because I don't think we have many opportunities to talk about big transitions and transformations while you're in it. It's always on the other side of it. What are the lessons? What are the learnings? Here's what I shifted and changed. But we miss, I think, so much of the power of when you're in it, being able to share from that place. And so I was so happy that you were willing to share, because I would imagine it's quite vulnerable to be able to be in this place of sharing some of the things that you're moving through right now. And so thank you for being open to this idea and this conversation, first of all. And before we jump in, because I want you to share a bit about you and your background and in this moment where you are, and then back up to kind of how you got here. But first, I also want to bring in that today is a very, I don't want to say auspicious, but pretty magical and powerful day. We are recording on February 20th, and this is the day where there is a powerful conjunction of Neptune and Saturn at 0 degrees Aries. And I say that knowing almost nothing about astrology other than what I attempt to remember, and so much of it leaves my brain. But what I do know is that we are in this space where we are meant to cross a threshold and reclaim both our sacred feminine energy, but also release what is out of balance for us, which again, aligns perfectly to what we're going to be talking about today. And this is something that has not happened in over 6,000 years. So it's not like this is some planetary shift that hasn't happened for 20 years or 30 years or even 100 years. 6,000 years. It's a massive cycle that we are birthing now. And so it just feels very poetic to be recording today with you and honoring the space that you're in this transition, and you being able to share your wisdom. So I wanted to just set the tone for the conversation, because I think all of these things, again, are not just coincidence. It is the universe aligning and bringing us what it is that we need in this moment. So all that being said, please share a little bit about you and the work that you've done and where you're at, and then we'll back up to the journey.
Oh, wow. So many beautiful gems in that opening right there. I think I'll start with where I feel that I am at in this like a precise moment. For me personally, we know 2025 was a 9-year, so it was bringing a 9-year cycle into completion. We know that we're moving into Aquarius out of the Piscean age. We know that Saturn is now stepping into Aries. Very, very different energy from where it's been. And then we have this square, as you were talking about today. And on top of that, I'm in my own second Saturn return, which hits about 58, 59, where we're being invited to see what we've actually mastered and what is not yet mastered that needs to be mastered. And so there is an energy of letting go, but not quite the same at the same level of when we were 29, when we hit our first Saturn return, where a lot of people just feel like things just fall apart. Whereas this is more of a falling apart together kind of way of feeling about it. And to speak directly to what I shared on our first call, it was, wonderful that you wanted to hear all about the work that I've been doing with women in the area of our personal sovereignty, really finding that deep, deep connection and core within ourselves, our own empowerment, which actually comes from our embodiment. It's about locating that sovereignty within our own bodies and utilizing our relationship with our body. First of all, for many of us, reclaiming our relationship with our body so that we can actually begin to count on reliably being able to interpret the information that it's giving us and begin to see it as an ally, something we partner with. And so I've loved doing that. My work has evolved over 3 decades around many different frames, the psychological work I have a doctorate in transformational psychology, the shadow work, so important for people who haven't yet started any kind of a conscious way of looking at the things that shape us, our life experiences, the conditioning we received when we were younger, the way our family system and the larger systems invite us to bend and pretzel and form ourselves so that we sometimes even lose connection with our true self. And then that recovery work of how we step back into our own sovereignty. So that's been a huge part of my life. And one thing that I have learned that when you actually do develop that deep sovereign relationship with the self and with the body, when the body speaks, there's no ignoring it. And one of the big things happening in my life right now has been a 2-year process of discerning that it was time for me to step out of my 25-year relationship and reconfigure that into a friendship. Currently, we're separated. And so all those questions are there. That was a big shift. My daughter's getting ready to graduate from college. She's, things are happening in her life. So everything about how I was identifying myself, locating myself, perceiving myself, wife, a mom, an entrepreneur, just all sort of came up for conversation. And when it came time for me to begin marketing my annual program, my body said no. No, there was no energy. There was no vitality. There was no aliveness. There was no excitement. There was just nothing but dread. And the thought of saying no to what's been the foundation of my income right at this time where I was needing to be more financially independent seemed crazy. And there's nothing for it for me anymore than to just follow the guidance, because not doing that is the actual crazy. So it's been an interesting time to let that be. And I've been held, I've been caught, I've been supported, I've been guided, and it isn't always easy. And it's beautiful.
Yeah. And so brave. I mean, I think most people listening, it would be hard to relate, because I think we're taught, and I just saw this beautiful post by someone I follow of, how our lives right now, how we've been programmed to chase money and have retirement. And if you don't have this and you don't have that, how are you going to make it through the world, and you're failing? And she put out this beautiful post of her current retirement plan. And she's listing off all these beautiful plants and flowers and trees she's planting and bounty she's creating with her own hands and working in the earth. And I shared it because I thought, what a beautiful way to think about our retirement plan is, what is your legacy that you're leaving behind for the earth? not in a building with 4 walls and vaults and whatever, and, that's all what we're doing, but being able to leave this footprint of this avocado grove or mango grove that you create with your hands, and it's able to sustain yourself and others, and just so beautiful. And I want to talk about, I know you've rehabbed a property that you bought thinking it was going to be this gathering space for, whatever that next chapter looked like, in the investment in that. And now pulling back from that, there's not a word that comes to me other than bravery, because that's a lot to step into and to accept. And so I just want to honor that, because I think most of us would be like, okay, nope, I'm pushing through this and I'm going to market this anyway. And maybe it's just, I need to get over this hump, or I need to work through something, but I'm going to push it and make it work. So I'm curious, just as you think about that, when I know you shared a little bit about your body, just really knowing and listening to your body of it telling you no. So I'm curious, for those who might be like, how do you really know when it's time to let something go, or when this is shadow work, where it's like, do I need to push through something or work through something? Is it a test?
Yeah, it's such a great place to be unpacking. So I'll start by saying that my typical way of living life as a part of the adaptation that I took on as a young person was to be the one that could make things happen. I remember my mom had this moment where she was insisting I had to clean my room before going out. And I must have been, 14. And I was just like telling her, I will do it when I get back. I will do it when I get back. And it was a real power struggle. And I somehow ended up saying, well, where there's a will, there's a way, or something. And she just gave up. She just gave up in the face of my energy. And I remember sort of feeling like, what? And I followed her around. I said, Mom, I promise I'll do it when I get back. And so that's been a very much an alive part of my way of being in the world, is like, I will make things happen. And I set a goal and I go get it, right? I've enjoyed that part of my life. And, probably somewhere around the time where I hit perimenopause, and the impact that had on my relationship at the time, where I was really thriving through masculine energy. And I chose that. I chose to align myself with masculine energy because inside of my family dynamic, my mother was deeply disempowered. And so the way I treated her that day was consistent with the way I saw my father treat her. Instead of listening to her, pausing for 15 minutes and going and cleaning my room, just dismissing her and saying, no, I'm going to do it my way. Typical teenager too, but that was just sort of the pattern that I picked up. So why align myself with her or with the feminine? And I remember also at that time, this will date me, there was a commercial for a perfume called Anjuli. And the jingle was, I can bring home the bacon and fry it up in a pan and never, never let you forget you're a man because I'm a woman. And then the second she's reading to her child, so it's all the things. You have to do all the things. You have to be all the things, which I very much subscribe to that idea. So rather than be disempowered, I will be superwoman. No problem. I got that. And I did all that. It was great until it wasn't anymore. And, not having access to my feminine was not only not good for me energetically, it didn't keep the polarity in the place that I wanted it to be in my relationship. And I did a lot of work to develop my feminine capacities, my capacity to receive, my capacity to be still, my capacity to move from a place of flow rather than in a fury, that sort of hyper explosive race right at it kind of energy.
Our hustle culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I learned to track my own hypervigilance and to begin to do nervous system repair so I could set that down. It's not very easy to hear your own signals when one of the ways you learned to make safe was to tune yourself to everything else that's going on in your world. My own signal just got very, very weak. And so over years of work, not only on myself, but through the act of teaching others. And I want to say this to women who are sort of new on the path, that sometimes we feel like we have to really, really master something before we can share it with others. Yes, you want to have some amount of skill, but you want to remember that the women who are coming up behind you, I mean, you have a viewpoint they don't yet have. And as I was supporting them, I was deepening my own mastery so that when it came time for this moment where I was invited through my body, through the wisdom of my body and my deeper connection through my soul and the way that I get guidance, it didn't actually feel that hard to listen. I've already had enough experience with leaning into that guidance to know things go better when I follow my guidance. And that's not to say that I haven't, over the past winter months, had moments of panic, like, what's going to happen? How am I going to make this work? And then to having to remind myself, I have resources. I haven't wanted to touch those, but I have resources and I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky in that regard. And if I need to, I can access that. And that's something that I've created with my partner over the last 25 years to be able to have that kind of safety net. So the moment of listening to the body doesn't start when just like now, like there's this practice that we have to build. And in the practice of wanting to listen in more deeply to the self, the body piece, the soul piece, we have to find what's in the way, what's on top of it, what's covering it up, what's muddying the signal, so that we can actually begin to really deeply feel ourselves. And even now, having lived alone for the last 3 months, I can feel myself right now in a way that I'm not sure if I could even think back to childhood of when the last time I felt so clearly in my own signal. No, there was a lot of chaos in my home growing up. So very early, I figured out, wow, I better track these people so I can try not to get blindsided. And to be living in my space right now on a day-to-day basis where I wake up when I want to. Sometimes I'll set an alarm, but for the most part, not. Going to bed when I want to go to bed, working on things that bring me alive, and trusting what will happen, what will come back into me at my space, energetically in terms of income and things of that sort, from a place of moving towards aliveness rather than trying to avoid destruction.
Yeah. Wow. It's like you're refilling your cup in such a deep way. It's refilling a well, really. It's not even the cup. This is like deep, deep work of going to the well of, okay, maybe you've been pouring from the cup for a while and, you go to the well and it's dry.
Right.
And
right.
now it's, how do I replenish this if there's no water around?
Mm-hmm.
And
there's something about this turn that's different from all the work I've done around work-life balance and about creating from ease and all the optimization pieces that I was putting into place around my business. I mean, I've done all of that. So I know how to run an international organization, an international school with varying levels of assistance and simplicity, playing with all of those levers. And there's something different that what's happening now is really more fundamental. It's really more about literally questioning the idea of what is work, what is contribution, what is legacy, what is alignment for me. And Saturn is in my 6th house. So when you're in your Saturn return, it really pushes on whatever house it lives in for you. And I only know enough of this to sound really dangerous and stupid,
yeah. But so what does that mean when it's in your 6th house?
Yes. So I had to check with my mentor, and she was like, "Rima, where is your Saturn?" I'm like, "I don't know." And she's like, "Well, look it up." And so she found it for me and said it's in your 6th house, which for me is about my own rhythms and discipline and how I organize my home and how I organize my daily living rituals, routines, structures. Ugh, I hate structure, but I need structure. And, we were playing with this idea about, like, I have this meditation practice that I do, and that provides some structure, but I haven't really been able to activate it as consistently as I was, because now that my partner's gone, my life is actually quieter and I don't need it in the same way I used to need it. And yet it still helps me as I have to deal with the chaos of the world to feel really, really rooted, And so I was talking to another friend who's on the other side of this, and she was helping me. I was talking about, well, I could get my charts out again and I could give myself stars for doing all the things I want to do, and she was like, oh God, no, like, like that's
no more charts.
That's just a reversion, to
Right,
another way of externalizing our own need to provide structure. And this go around for me is actually about trusting that I have the mastery. I have the mastery within me, and that if I will start the day with what would bring me alive today, including, there's a few things that need to be done. What on the list of to-dos do I have energy for? And live from that and trust that I can live an authentically mastered life with those questions at the center of my organizing principle. And when my partner first left, it was so sad. I mean, we were on the driveway holding each other and crying. How did we get here? I mean, there's no lack of love. It's just that the configuration is just not correct for us anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And, it took 2 years to finally be able to be fully honest about that. And so he left, and for a little bit, there was just the falling apart, and I started to get a little worried because the house became a total mess and I wasn't bathing and I wasn't, I just was like really in it. I was really letting myself not do anything. And then the holidays came and there was some travel that was needed, and we did keep our family plans in place, which was what our plan was. And all that went really well and was great. And then it was a moment of, okay, we don't thrive in chaos. So there's some basic things have to happen. We have to bathe, we have to feed ourselves well, we have to get sleep, adequate sleep, and take our vitamins. And basically that's what I set as my bottom line. The rest of what you want to do for December, January, until the Lunar New Year, basically even, you do whatever you feel called to do. And I have this big creative project that's unfolding. And so it was a dance of watching myself decompose, go into composting mode, rot, as the kids like to say, giving myself permission to watch a lot of really good television and also work at the things that I had the energy for, and to just trust that the rest would be okay. And what I found was that in the beginning, I distracted myself a lot, which was okay. This, whatever it is, this is what it is. This is what I have. And slowly over time, as I began to heal, I began to find my own rhythm. I had given myself space, had taken out all the criticism. Eventually, I began to feel, okay, I'm starting to have a little more capacity now. I'm starting to feel a little more ready to be productive, but not out of fear, not because I needed to be a good girl, not because I was worried about what I should be doing, but because it was authentically arising within me. The energy was there to create. And that's a completely different thing. That's a completely different way of being. And it's been a real delight to let my creativity flow. And I'm writing a fiction book. And also this collaborative program, which is how you heard about me, that I'm doing with 2 other sister priestesses. And what I noticed is that the initial enrollment sometimes things take time to really gain speed. And so you learn to trust enrollment cycles. And then when I let myself really move into that creative energy and began to lift and feel inspired again, I noticed that the enrollment started to pick up. So I feel like there is some connection in terms of how I'm holding myself, which was actually another reason why I knew that there was no sense in going into an enrollment period with my annual program. I didn't have it. I couldn't hold it. I wasn't going to be able to hold the energetics that are necessary to have the outcome that I would desire. So I would deplete myself for very little return. And it made no sense to go down that path.
Yeah. And it makes so much sense if something's just no longer in alignment. You've been moving through, like you said, this wasn't just an immediate, okay, all these things are changing and everything falls apart. It's been a gradual unwinding and, maybe falling apart a bit from those structures. But I'm grateful for how you shared that and explained that, because I think a lot of people would wonder what that looks like. Because, of course, all we hear about is usually the fantastical big blow ups and just one day someone walks out and things fall apart, which, of course, that happens too. But just how you've been doing all this work to get to this moment, to be able to hold space for yourself without judgment, like that lack of judgment of I need to just, lay on the couch and watch TV and not shower, or I need to do this or that. And then I can only imagine, like I can feel as you start to feel called to engage, even just with yourself in a different way, of what that feels like, because the smallest things all of a sudden are really beautiful things. Preparing a meal for yourself, shopping for fresh produce to make some type of meal and not feel that obligation of I have to cook this for someone else or I have to do this for whatever reason, but getting into that creative flow, even in just something so simple as that, and how it can bring a lot of joy. And when we think about the ancients, I mean, a big part of their day and time would be all around that, of like harvesting food, planting food, taking care of plants, taking care of small things in the home. I mean, they weren't hustling for money and to be able to get things outside of them that might have brought them joy. It was, can I, feed myself and find beauty in this beautiful piece of fruit that I get to eat or share with my community or my family? Can I sculpt this bowl that I could give as an offering or a gift to someone? Like such small things, but we have set our bar so high as to what is enjoyable and where can we find joy and happiness. And it's all those things that you talked about, being everything external. And this call home to yourself is just so magical.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it, to notice some of the bane of excess, right? The reason that we have the luxury to not have to think about growing food and not have to think about, do I have to make a new bowl for the household, is that we have, as a species, continued to develop our capacity to create abundance, to hold excess, extra, which I think we're sort of coming to see the worst of that, like the natural outpicturing of what was at the beginning a very wonderful, strong impulse. It's good to have set something back to get through the winter. It's good that when we harvest, we have more than enough. It's okay and good to create comfort, to have people moving through that process of being productive in ways that generates more than they need to share with others or pass it on in generations. But the dirty little secret behind that is that a lot of this has gotten out of balance to the point that we are extracting now. It's extractive. So we're sitting in a patriarchal capitalist system, late stage, that is at its pinnacle of extraction. And it extracts not only from the earth, it extracts from everybody inside the system. Everybody is a resource to be tapped. Mm-hmm. Even when you look at what's happening with the most heinous crimes of that network of wealthy men, again, resourcing children to abuse them. It's sort of the grossest example of the belief that what's here is here for any individual to extract from without having responsibility for the impact of that extraction. And so when more and more I'm beginning to understand how necessary it is to tune in to when something is past its prime, when it's time for something to be put down, it's time for something to end, and to gracefully lean into ending it in such a way that the wisdom of it can be harnessed before it falls apart, when the integrity is no longer actually there to hold it together. And so we can listen for the signals. So in my annual program, I had a number of mentees working with me, and that went really well. I was working to give them greater positions of leadership. And then I found that as I did that, I noticed inside myself, I began to be less invested. I wanted to make space for them, but a byproduct of that was that I was less invested. And so I needed to catch that and look at, okay, where is that not serving the container? Where does it serve to give space? Where does it not serve if I've pulled back too far? And in that dance, there were certain wobbles and things that occurred. And then a couple of individuals had personal struggles and had to step back, which then again made space for me to lean in again more deeply. And as I was tracking that, I began to see, oh, okay, these are signals that I can read and see that the amount of energy I still personally need to bring to this container is here. And if I'm not meeting that level, it's not going to hold. It's not going to hold. So then I had this time where I don't have the energy to do this, to do it at the level of integrity that I need to do it at in order for it to be the program it's always been. If I pushed past that and continued and went around another cycle, I can pretty much guarantee what happens in lots of containers would have happened in this one, where something blew up, something didn't hold, something didn't land well, because the energetic foundation wouldn't have been solid. And I've learned through my own experience of being in containers where I've seen mentors and leaders stay one cycle longer than they should have. What happens when their heart's not really in it, when they're on to the next thing, real harm can get done. And I actually believe that this is a new piece coming online for me to notice when systems, whether those are family systems or the systems we create inside our own containers or the larger system, when the system has hit a place where the structure we've built is not sustainable. It's either, gotten too big, or it's asking too much from the time, or the capacity of the people within it have been shifting. When we insist on staying past the due date and not listening to the signals, harm happens. It's like when a piece of fruit starts to rot, it puts off a smell and it starts to look less appealing. Why? So that the body has a body response of, oh, I shouldn't eat that. That would not be good for me to eat. Nature builds this in. And when we override those signals and we are not capable of gracefully ending things before they get really bad, this is how we end up creating harm. And in the broader collective systems, we create harm at scale. So we've got some problems in our political process. We've got all kinds of money in there it's not functioning correctly. We've got this two-party system that's not functioning correctly. We have ways of peddling influence, which is skewing everything. And we're being invited to take a really, really big look at what needs to be adjusted in this system. And it's putting off a smell right now. And many of us, or people are saying, well, how can we Band-Aid here? How can we Band-Aid there? And most likely, if all the cycles that I'm reading are correct, we're actually going into a time of significant sort of unraveling that's necessary so that it's the breakdown that makes it possible for something really new to break through, and not this sort of continuing to let's see if we can keep the ball rolling even though it's all damaged. So how do we do that in our own lives? How do we keep forcing things to go on? This is not a moment of personal, I should just lean in, I'm almost at the finish line. I think you get to be around the block a few times like I have. I can tell the difference between when it's, a little bit of my inner child whining a little, feeling a little tired, feeling a little scared, afraid of her bigness. That's something completely different from the humility it takes to say, actually, this thing I've built has been beautiful and wonderful. And if I keep going and I can't meet it, what it needs from me, it's going to create harm. And I don't want to participate in that.
Wow. That's so powerful, and such a powerful message for not just us as a collective, but as you said, the individual. When I think of how we talk about how we can all come back to ourselves, feel our sovereignty, but also our agency to have control of how we want to show up in the world each day, what we want to contribute in our own way. And those are the ripples that are going to go out into the world, into the collective to change things. And it's not as much as we know that all these big structures that we are living inside of that you talked about are deeply broken and really do need to fall apart so that we can get to that place, just as you, I think, painted the picture of what's happened to you in this tiny microcosm of the collective. Is there's got to be that time of where it does fall apart. And let's be honest, it's been falling for quite a long time. We know this. It hasn't been serving people, whether that's healthcare, politics, education, pretty much you name whatever system it is, it's really not working. So shouldn't be shocking to people. I think just most of us haven't wanted to see it because it means change for all of us. And most people avoid change because it's uncomfortable. But looking at how we all can take responsibility for our own lives, and not that you have to be worried about what every single person outside of you is doing, but coming back to self like you're doing, and just every day coming from that place of whether it's working on a project or letting something fall away that we know no longer serves us, and being brave enough to say, okay, I know this doesn't serve me. So let me give myself some time and space to figure out what is going to, because jumping just right into something else, as you said, that's not going to fix anything. It's just kind of putting off the inevitable. And then that probably is not going to work out. And then you'll be back at this place, and then you'll have all kinds of judgments about yourself because that didn't work. So now what? And so all of us taking this time to really do this work to listen. And I guess, I don't know if I even call it work to listen, but to be able to tune in and listen to ourselves and figure out what is calling to us, what is speaking to us, what are things, whether it's relationships, things that we're doing that we're trying to push through, what can we maybe put down and let go of so it does start to become the compost for the soil where we do want to plant new seeds. And so that soil is rich and has nutrients to be able to hold whatever it is we do want to plant and have eventually blossom and bloom into what that next thing is. But that's how we are going to all help the collective in these structures to become reimagined, without going too much into, 3D and 5D and timelines and all those things, which can be distracting, I think, for the general listeners and just the collective of what can you do in this moment to listen to your body and to be inspired by what you're doing to say, okay, if this isn't working, doesn't mean right away you're like, okay, I'm quitting my job, I'm leaving my relationship, I'm doing all these things. Like just starting to listen to those cues of like, how is this feeling for me? And does this feel like it's still in alignment for me? And I know I can speak from a place of, I am very grateful for the work I do in the world with people who have lost their jobs and going through these really big transitions. And I love the work that I do, but the way that I do it is so differently now because I knew the way I was doing it, driving to bring in revenue and money, wasn't filling my soul. Like it felt like something was missing. And when I decided to really come to this place of, I need to be my true authentic self and show up every time I have a conversation in this place of how can I bring this person more light? How can I help them open the aperture for what is possible in their life? Because most people are not giving or are not able to have the wisdom that I've gained over 15 years of doing this work to be able to have those conversations, how it shifts people. Even I can see the possibility start to like just this little turn when people realize, oh, I don't have to keep going after this thing because I've been told I have to, or I got an education in this and I'll be letting this person down, or whatever it might look like, of just think about the possibilities and follow something that's going to bring you joy. That is how we collectively change. Because all of a sudden, these things you're talking about of the excess, the extraction, how we are just getting things to get things. And then when we don't want them anymore, we just throw them out. And then where's it going? It's polluting our water and our earth and soil and all the things. And we're taking all the resources from the earth. And she's also at a point where she's like, no, this doesn't work for me either. And so we are going to see significant climate changes, which we've already seen, but there's going to be even more coming where Mother Earth is going to do what she needs to do to heal as well. And if we're not listening and we're not in reverence to that process, there is going to be suffering.
So inside of that, what we start to notice is that all that over collection, over creation, over doing, over having begins to actually seep our life force energy out of it. It takes a lot to maintain a really big life, really big structures. And you said something earlier about finding the simplicity inside of things. When we're in a collective moment that we're in right now, where we're at the beginning of a major devolutionary cycle that's there so that the breakthrough can happen, we're going to be asked very soon, right now, and then this will land differently depending on where you are in your own personal life. Actually, let me start there. So my daughter is a Gen Zer, and that generation hasn't seen as much of the benefit of the current systems. So they have very little loyalty to those systems. They feel a lot of the dysfunction of those systems. Right now, they're the generation feeling that dysfunction the most as a generation. Then you can see that across generations inside of different populations, for example, poor people, people of color, marginalized people, also very much don't have the same relationship to existing systems because they haven't almost maybe never worked very well for them. They've been able to succeed in spite of them in many cases. Same is going to be true for Gen Zers. Some of them will succeed in spite of it. But for the most part, what's happening is that the system has become so overwrought and its dysfunction is so clearly on display, which is a needed moment. The pain, the destruction, even the pain of Mother Earth, it has to become visible or legible, readable. And so it's coming out from behind the scenes right now because we have to feel it. We have to feel enough of it. I'm always praying for the requisite amount of pain and not one drop more. Because whatever that feeling is, then we respond to that. And so, as I was saying earlier, in your own life, you can develop yourself to become more sensitive so that you need less and less of the incoherence or incongruence to appear in order for you to make the shift. And the earlier you can make those shifts, the shorter the turnaround span tends to be. And so we're sitting with a group of us, billions of humans together, all being invited at different times and different places in our own lives with different levels of experience, soul experience, personal experience, to make a big turnaround. As you say, some of what we're dealing with are cycles and structures that are thousands and thousands of years old. And these are choice points. These are moments. And not everybody will make those choice points. And sometimes the collective will go the way it needs to go. It's always going how it's going to go. And sometimes there will only be a certain number of souls that make that adjustment in this go round. Nothing to worry about. There's more go rounds coming. And that doesn't excuse the need to lean in and show up in the way that you feel called to do. So I got a really big lesson about this when I was in Hawaii visiting. I actually did live there for a while as well. And this particular visit, we were traveling, going down to visit Pele, the volcano. And we were driving along the coastline. And on one side is the mountain and on the other side is the coast, And it was so lush and beautiful. And I was thinking about the lushness of that jungle there. And she began speaking to me, Pele did, and she said, I destroyed this land with my volcanic eruption, and that ash took everything out, but it became the richness out of which what you see now has grown. And creation and destruction are two sides of the same coin. And Eastern traditions have kept this. It's been very much embedded in their way of understanding the world, that these are cycles. We clear, we plant, we grow, we harvest, we clear, and so on. Yep. And the cycle itself is there's nothing evil about it, even though it can be hard at times. And we might prefer different times in the cycle. In the Western world, we said anything that looked like death or destruction, we made that the devil, and we said, well, God can only be this. And so we, instead of understanding that it's the totality of the experience. And to me, the real evil happens when people willfully stay in cycles past their prime that cause harm intentionally, even though they know it's there because they're milking it for their own benefit. They're exploiting it for their own benefit. They're exploiting others. And so as you're sort of talking about this time we're in, we want to understand both personally, are we in a building moment? Are we in a harvesting moment? Are we in a time of reset? Are we in the planting moment? Where are we in our own personal life inside the cycle? And then we locate that inside of the bigger cycle that we're sitting in. Our business cycle might be different from our personal cycle. So we really want to sort of be thinking about trying to get to know the cycles that we live in and actually begin the process of locating ourselves inside those cycles of time. And for me, that's brought so much settling to my nervous system. Oh, we're just in this normal time that happens. There's a great book called The Fourth Turning is Here, and it describes these 90 to 110 year cycles called saeculum that societies go through. We just happen to be at the end of the fourth one of these in the United States that's aligning up with all these other large cycles that are lining up. So it's a really big moment of potential. And it's scary because we don't know what will be on the other side. When you're going through the eye of the needle, so to speak, you are invited to let go of everything that needs to be let go of. And we don't know what will meet us on the other side. And so conversations like these, communities where we can talk about this in a reasonable way that's not like elevating a sense of doom or foreboding, that's actually reminding us we've survived these, we will survive this too. Not every place in the world is going to be devolving at the same time, that things do need to run their course, that holding on will create more suffering actually. And so the change becomes, instead of being about expansion and transformation, again, depending on where you are in your own personal cycle, this is where I'm at, the shift has been away from those energies into preservation and conservation. What needs to be kept? To be in that moment of assessing what of all that's been created needs to be held on to and offered as legacy for those coming behind. And then where do I put that, like little caches, so to speak, so that I can be nimble and agile and not weighed down and move forward toward the future and hold on to, most importantly, my sense of humanity, my capacity to stay in the field of love, even as I am a holy hell no to some of this egregious behavior. And to be able to do those two things together, what does it take? Who do I have to be to do those two things together? To not harden myself so that I'm not living with the best of me. I want to feel my own softness on the inside and my own access to love on the inside of my body. That doesn't mean you get access to that, unless you've shown that's a trustworthy place for me to be externally soft. But I don't want to give up my internal softness while I am saying, holy hell no to all that out there. So, I feel like we are so blessed to have chosen to incarnate right now. And like 2 days ago, I wasn't feeling so blessed. I was feeling like, why in the hell did I come to this shit show? So, I'm just being really real here, right? Like today I feel the blessing.
Yeah. You've got more hope today. So I'm glad to hear that. But I mean, that's the human experience, right? We're going to have these moments and we're on this roller coaster ride, it feels like every minute. But if we can return to self and that softness and knowing that we came here for a very specific reason and purpose, and it's connecting to that and figuring out, how can I learn here? How can I grow? How can I help others, expand others? But at the same time, it really is our lives, our sovereign existence here that we need to come back to. And of course, even from a feminine perspective, having, moved away from the feminines for so long, we're also taught that it's about everyone else and taking care of everyone else. And if you're a good mother and you're a good nurturer and a good, all the things, you would care for everyone else and put all your energy into that, which of course then just depletes us for our own energetic livelihood.
Yeah. Mothering, giving, this is an outward flow of energy. That is energetically masculine. We've genderized it and call it women's work. But gestating the baby, that's archetypally feminine. And when the baby's born, we move from the pelvis to the chest. We nurse the baby. It's an output that's archetypally masculine, actually. So, the whole dynamics of understanding energy flows and getting away from masculine and feminine archetypes as gender expressions and all the ways we've overlaid what women do, what men do, what non-binary people do. Like, it's another element that's confusing us right now about how we operate our energy bodies,
Yeah. Yeah, I actually just learned something really interesting in this class that I was in this week. It's called The Four Faces of the Goddess, and learning about the medicine wheel and the colors of white, black, red, and yellow being the sun, red being blood and life-giving and everything from death and rebirth and menses and how bleeding, the life-giving, and now being able to give life to something else. But what really shocked me a bit was that white and black, we in this structure have reversed, like we see black as darkness and white as the light, when in the feminine, when we're in our feminine power, and how this actually works is that the black was the feminine and that was life. And it was part of the cycle of death and rebirth. And the white was the dark, and how that all flipped and changed. And I'd never heard that before. And it just was fascinating to think about, and just speaks so much to how things have shifted and changed as we've come into these structures and been reborn in a way that doesn't serve all. And so just even connecting to that for me was like this, I felt like someone like smacked me in the face, and it was like, okay, here's something so simple, like black and white, how we have literally how those have shifted and changed what we assign to them for meaning. And if you take that and extrapolate it into the rest of the world, we could say that about so much, even what you were just talking about, gestating and growing the child baby versus feeding them outwardly, like thinking about that, same thing. Like it's when you start to unpack and learn these things, it's so fascinating to me. It's so fascinating. And then has you questioning things of these small things. Yeah. Yeah.
We could do a whole podcast on just that notion that we've transposed, like what in a light polarized culture, what that does when we don't have access to the gestating beauty of the sweet darkness, right? The velvety place that's the womb, and how that got shunned. You're touching on some really deep mystical principles that are why we're actually in this place of being so out of balance. And, you can look at the yin yang symbol as the perfect touchstone, where you have the black teardrop and the white teardrop. And of course, inside of each is the beginning of the other, because actually that geometry, it's laid 2-dimensional, but when you make it 3 dimensions, it's a toroidal field that spins and turns, and what starts out as an exit becomes an entrance. And then that entrance becomes an exit, and it goes around like this. And this brings us right back to that conversation about understanding cycles and not resisting the moment when it's time for us to shift from entrance energy to exit energy, from external outpouring energy to bringing the energy in. And rather than being, a polarity is 2 interdynamic structures that need one another. They work together as a pair. And when we over-preference one and the upside of one, we become blind to the downside of that side of the pole. And when we over-preference, the same thing can happen on the other side, but it's very much like breathing. Inhaling and exhaling are both required. One is not better than the other. They have to work together. There's upsides to inhaling and downsides to inhaling. There's upsides to exhaling and downsides to exhaling. If you just inhale and never exhale, you're going to die. If you just exhale and never inhale, you're going to die. So part of what I believe comes forth in the masterful spiritual life is the recognition that it isn't about locating, if I can just find the right place to land, if I can just check all the boxes, do all the right studies, come into all the right knowledge, then I can relax and I'll have my place of standing. And I think the maturing that happens as we recognize we do all that, we go on all those exploratory journeys, only to discover that it's the process of moving, of staying present and moving around the lemniscate, moving around the infinity symbol, going towards the upsides until they're done, then moving to the opposite direction with joy, with presence, not cursing the process most of the time or as much as we can, and being willing to be humble and let go of what we think we know as new information comes on board and begins to just tell us, it might be time for an adjustment here. And then it's just the practice of listening, the practice, the art of watching the signs of clearing the body, clearing your field as much as you can, and trying to organize your life so that you're not actively adding interference into your own space and you're not tolerating interference that others might be putting into your space. Otherwise, it just makes your practice harder.
Which is why I just had the words pop up of like, life is the journey. It's not an endpoint. It's not the finish line. Because really, if you think about the finish line, you're probably done here. Like, that's it. You're finished. You might be finished with the cycle, but it is that journey of getting there and all those lessons and the joys and maybe the things that were really hard. And you might have grief along the way of that journey. But then coming back into, like you said, I think the infinity symbol is such a beautiful, poetic way to think of the cycle of, you're going to rise again and there'll be that next chapter. But everything you've learned along that journey is just building on whatever that thing is next. And sometimes I hear people who are in these corporate jobs of, could I really make this switch and go do this thing that's so unrelated, but I love it, or it's something I do on the weekends, this whole thing that's happened since the pandemic of the gig work and people wanting to start their own businesses or finding joy in that, realizing that life can be short and we can lose people. And no one at the end is saying like, gosh, I'm so glad I stayed to put more money in my 401k and, let this company suck the life out of me. No one's saying that. Most people are regretful. And like, gosh, I wish I would have bought that farm in the country and just sat on a porch and watched the sunset. And that's what people regret. And so I feel like we have been moving as a society towards finding some of those pinpricks of joy and light of like, what is giving me energy? What is making me feel fulfilled? And I think now as you've talked about, and this whole conversation is about, when though are you listening to, okay, if you keep getting joy from that, and sometimes it's elevating what we feel or what we know brings us happiness and joy, other things might start to really get harder and harder and harder, and really taking a look at that and saying, okay, it's maybe served its purpose. I've been able to buy a home or do whatever, but now what can I do to keep bringing more joy in instead of letting this thing pull me down and pull me down and pull me down? And the work that you've done, and I guess really this moment in time that you're really in like the fertile void and the void is where all creation comes from, whether that's from a seed starting in the soil or a baby gestating in the womb and being in this void, which is dark, but that's where creation comes from. That's where everything is birthed and born from. And so being able to hear your journey while you're in this place, in this void, I think is just really special. And I'm grateful for everything you shared. And I would ask if there was like one or two things you would tell people today in the space that you're at currently of that they could do if they're thinking like, oh crap, I really resonate with this, but this is scary. What would you say to someone listening?
I would say that quiet time, taking time, give yourself, organize a way to step out of your life for a couple of days. If you can't do it for a couple of days, maybe a couple of hours. I've been at this moment before where I've needed to take time to listen and give yourself permission to not know and to recognize that it could take time for what's next to come through. And just record, I did art, I would journal. These are things that I've all done in the void. I've allowed myself to follow an interest, a research interest perhaps, to read a book that I've been meaning to get to just let things stop for a little bit and then open to how I might receive information. And I think the thing I like about doing art, and even at the most out of all those things I mentioned, is that it actually opens a doorway to the deeper part of yourself. Journaling can do that too, especially if you're letting yourself free write. Sometimes following a research lead will sort of, if your higher self is engaged, you go on that little breadcrumb trail and you find yourself at, oh, that's the thing I needed. But really just allowing yourself to question and to not know, and then do your inner shadow work around what pushes up against your architecture that makes you perhaps not feel safe to not know, not feel safe to pause. What stories are you running about maybe how people need you or who you're supposed to be in the world or how other people see you? Like you mentioned that I'm in the question of whether I'm going to keep this beautiful historical home that I purchased and renovated to run temple out of. And for a moment when I was contemplating, oh, I might be being asked to put this down, there was this inner stab of, but I was really public about moving back here and buying this house and getting people involved. And isn't this going to seem like a failure? And the minute I saw, oh yeah, I hear you, little one, like that part of my ego that doesn't want to be perceived a certain way. Because I've done shadow work for 20 years, I was just able to hear that and very lovingly say, you make sense. I get that you're worried about being perceived that way. That's not a thing. Just so you know, that's not a thing. We're not a failure and it doesn't matter. That's not a thing. And then I was able to let that go and move on. And so if you haven't done much of that work yet, or even if you have, when you start to be in the quiet and you're wondering about, is this a time of transition for me? All those voices about what your people from your past or people in your current life that you think they may think, those voices will arise and it will be up to you to say, that's not my voice, that's not my voice, that's not my voice. That is my voice, but that's coming from something that's not healthy. And just to begin to lovingly, compassionately make space for that to rise up. And at the same time say, you do not get the keys to the bus. I hear you. You can have a seat on the bus, but my soul is what's driving the bus. My functioning, conscious adult self can drive the bus. There's only two people in the driver's seat.
Yeah. And there's that not attaching to that thought. I just was talking about this morning of we can have the thought, we can acknowledge the thought, like you said, but then don't attach to it. You don't have to attach to it and now claim it as yours. You can release it. Most of the time, it's not even our thought. It's what we've been programmed to think, and it's all this outside influence. So I love that, because when you do really have a moment and you take time to think about where is this coming from and you identify it, and yes, many times I'm sure it's different parts of ourselves from our childhood and whatnot, but a lot of times it is just from what we think other people are thinking. And yeah, they don't get a seat at the table. Like that is not going to rule how I'm going to live my life, because they don't have to live this life. I have to live this life. So that's very, very beautiful advice. Thank you. Well, thank you so much again for being here and sharing from this space of the void. And I can only imagine what is going to be birthed and created from this space, and would love to certainly hear down the road what that looks like. And maybe it's recording another episode when you've gotten there so we can reflect on this journey and everything you've learned and what's come of it, because I'm sure it will be really powerful. So thank you.
Yeah, I'd love that. I'd love that. Thank you so much for having me on, for holding space for a topic that I don't think we talk about very much, how to do graceful endings. And so it's really served me to be able to articulate some of what I'm living through right now. So thank you so much, Heather. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I think there's something to be said, or something that maybe is birthed from the graceful endings, because I think we don't acknowledge that enough in society. I think we're just starting with end-of-life doulas and care, how we can really exit, whether it's the physical or some of these structures or whatever it might be in our world. How can we exit them without shame or judgment or guilt or whatever the thing is? It's powerful, but it's hard work. And I think having kind of a Sherpa, if you will, to guide through these endings or help us navigate this time is, really needed. So thank you for everything you shared. I think it's really important. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. And we'll be sure to put some of the things we referenced in our conversation in the show notes. And until next time, be well. And we are appreciating and loving you from afar. And if you're going through a tough time or an ending, know you're not alone. And this is the work that we're here to do. And there's always that upcycle that's going to come, but it can be a really powerful time for creation and really stepping into our power. So sending you lots of love as you're on this journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your precious day to listen to our podcast. If this episode resonated with you, we would love for you to share it with someone you love. That would mean the world to us. Also, if you feel called, please follow our show so you will know when a new episode drops. If you want to go one step further, you can even rate this episode, as it allows our podcast to find its way to others. Lastly, we've done our best to share resources that you might find helpful in the show notes, whether that's a book recommendation or a website we referenced during the episode, a free resource, or more information on a guest who took their time to speak with us and share their knowledge. We would love for you to support their work too. You can find more information on our podcast website at becomingspiritual.me. We love you and can't wait for you to hear the next episode. Until then, know you have a place where you are welcome and you are loved. Welcome home.